You're on local radio, AM 1490 and FM 101.3. My name is Ben Marshall, and as we've continued here in the with the month of September being the 75th anniversary in 2021 for WMOA Radio, and we have had the opportunity to talk to a lot of folks who have done a lot of great work for WMOA Radio in the 75 years. And as we've continued, we've had the opportunity to kind of find more and more voices as we've gone along, and we are pleased to be joined now by Mr. Don Jordan. And Don, you and I have had, pretty long-standing communication back and forth for maybe a couple years now, mostly surrounding Louise Zimmer and your long-standing listening of WMOA Radio through our online feeds. That's kind of how you and I connected. But you are. And I went back and looked at old emails to sort of research all this, but as you've told me in the past, you are a 1961 graduate of Marietta High School, and you grew up in Marietta. So tell me a little bit about growing up in Marietta.
Well, Ben, I was basically raised in Marietta almost all my life. Went through the public school system there. Grew up on the west side of Marietta, near what I guess we would say today used to be Harmer Elementary. I guess the school is no longer being used as an elementary school. But in any event, I grew up there. All those little streets around the west side, like Maple Street and Gilman and Front Street, Fort Street and Franklin Street and so forth. Knew all of those businesses, like the Busy Bee and the what used to be the Maple Cafe that is no more, Harmer Tavern, and Harmer News was a newsstand there on Maple Street. So that was my life in Marietta. I grew up on the west side and went to Marietta College, graduated from there. So I was there in Marietta through 1965. So my early memories of WMOA was before I was a part-time employee as an announcer on the weekends. One of my memories, program memories that some listeners might find interesting, back in those days, the studio was located in the basement of the Lafayette Hotel. And one of the programs that the station did, and I listened to periodically, they would broadcast organ music from the gun room, the restaurant there in the Hotel Lafayette, and they played organ music during the dinner hour. And the station had a microphone put in there, and for 1 hour, as I recall, you could tune in and listen to the organ music being played in the gun room. There was no announcer or anything telling you about the music or what music was going to be played or what they had played and so forth. And so you heard in the background of the organ music the bus boys collecting the plates from the tables and chit chat from some of the employees probably and perhaps customers. It was just an unusual live radio listening experience. That was one of my early memories of WMOA.
Certainly a unique memory you have there. Can you pinpoint what year that would have been?
Well, I thought about that, and I would guess that was probably around 58, 59. That's my guess.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my other memories of the station in those years, I was too young to be an employee, but I would occasionally visit a friend of mine who did weekend work at the station, and when he wasn't busy, I would go over and just pass the time with him. And one of the stories, his name was Tom Porter, whose folks operated a dry cleaner shop on the west side on Maple Street. But Tom told me the story that one year when they had to move out of the basement due to the floods, which was a fairly common experience in those days, for some reason when they were moving a desk out of the studio, they couldn't get it through the door, and they apparently didn't figure out how they got it through the door to begin with. and they took a circular saw and cut the desk to size so it would fit through the door, which seems kind of strange that they could figure that out, but why that memory stuck with me, I don't know, but it did.
It has been an incredible experience to talk to some of the older folks and those that have come before me, obviously. And previous to you, Mr. Jordan, the oldest employee that we've had the chance to talk to is Dick Sams, and he shared stories about WMOA, which was in the Dime Bank at the time whenever he started here anyways, of course, in downtown Marietta. So talk a little bit about how you got involved with WMOA when it would have been downtown as well.
Sure. And you're right. The studio at that time was located in the Dime Bank. And when I was a college kid, first year or two in college, I was a part-time employee at the station, did announcing on the weekend. And as that person you're referring to, I don't recall meeting him, but he may have talked about the studio. But in those days, I have to stop and think. They reconfigured the space to make 3 rooms, one for the office for the station manager, one for the receptionist, then the studio itself. And so most of my experience at the studio would have been playing LP 33 and a third LP records with music. In those days, we played a lot of Ray Conniff Singers and Bert Kaempfert, Manavani, and a lot of other groups that I can't think of at the moment. But the studio was in a fairly small space, and it did not have central air conditioning, so in the summertime, there was a window air conditioner, and it blew right across the microphone. So when you turned on the mic to give a station ID or read a commercial or whatever, you had this loud noise from an air conditioner blowing across the mic. And that was just the way broadcasting was in those days when the station was in the Dime Bank, if you will. It was a fairly small space. The teletype machine was put in a closet, so they kept the door shut most of the time, so the clanging of the bells and so forth on the teletype machine, you couldn't hear in the studio. Mm-hmm. But it was rip and read news, as they used to call it, off the teletype because there was no news department. And that's basically how the station operated. One of the employees at the time was a fellow by the name of Bud. I think you pronounce his last name Katz, K-A-T-Z. Might have been Cates, but one or the other. Bud was a salesman, was a real sports enthusiast, and he did the afternoon shift on the air shift at the station. And Bud was there for probably, I'm not sure, 3, 4, maybe 5 years. And another employee at the time was the chief engineer, Charlie Clark. Mm-hmm. And Charlie and I knew each other outside of broadcasting because we both shared a passion for the same hobby called ham radio. But in any event, Charlie was the chief engineer for several years. In fact, Ben, his office or his home was just down the street from where your studio is located today. And I always thought that Charlie located the station up there to be close to his home. I don't know if that was true or not, but I always thought that's why he did that. But he was a neat fella, enjoyed Charlie a lot, and if he were alive today, he would probably tell you the story. For some reason, he had me go over to the transmitter site, which in those days was in Williamstown. I don't remember why I was over there, but I took a book with me from one of my college classes, and to pass the time, I would work on one of my classes. Well, the audio was playing pretty loudly, and I turned the audio down so it would be easier to study. Well, little did I realize the audio that I turned down controlled the audio going to the transmitter. So he came storming over at the radio or transmitter site. What are you doing? Nobody ever told me that the volume control turned the volume down going to the transmitter.
And you mentioned a friend earlier, Mr. Porter, that worked for WMOA as well. Was he sort of your way into the radio station?
Yeah. In fact, Tom is still alive. He's in his mid-80s. And I still have contact with Tom, 3 or 4 times a year at least. Tom's also one of these guys that's an avid ham radio operator, and through that hobby, we still maintain contact with each other. He lives up near Cleveland today, but goes down to Marietta once in a while. But yeah, he was my early contact with WMOA.
1965 graduate of Marietta College. What did you study there?
Speech and English. And in terms of my broadcasting career, after being at WMOA for a couple of years part-time, I did a couple of part-time years down in Parkersburg at WTAP Radio. And in fact, my friend Tom Porter, he later went to work at WCEF. These stations, I'm not sure if they still operate under those call signs anymore. But we both wound up in Parkersburg for a little bit. And my broadcasting career served me well. Because after college, I went to seminary out in Berkeley, California. And while there, I worked in broadcasting part-time at a radio station called KNEW. That was an all-talk radio station located in Jack London Square in Oakland. And it proved to be a very helpful way of generating money, if you will, to get through college and later through seminary. So it was a good experience.
So you went through seminary and pursued a life there, presumably?
Well, you would think that, Ben, but I actually did not. After a couple of years in seminary, I decided, no, I don't think I want to do this for the rest of my life, and went into, I worked in the nonprofit world. I worked for 6 years as a YMCA director, part of it in Michigan, part of it in Wisconsin. And for the remainder of my career, about 34 years, I worked for an organization called United Way, which you would be familiar with. And so I was executive director of United Way programs in different cities. You moved around a little bit, usually from once moving to a larger city, if you will, each time. And so anyhow, to answer your question, Ben, no, I didn't pursue broadcasting as a career, and neither did I stay with the ministry, but in a way, different kind of ministry, helping people in a different way than through a church.
It seems that radio has always interested you, and I know for sure that it's something that can really grab a hold of you. Do you still have the itch, if you will, the passion for radio?
Well, I don't have the itch, but I do still enjoy listening to a lot of, mostly AM broadcasting. Mm-hmm. And in fact, one of my hobbies is I've got a fairly sophisticated AM broadcast shortwave receiver, and I enjoy listening to stations as far away as I can pick up on my receiver, and easy to listen to, like WABC, NBC, WCBS, WBZ, Boston, those big stations back east. You can usually pick up some of the stations down south. Just as a sub-hobby, I still enjoy the broadcast industry, if you will,
sure,
by way of listening to AM broadcasting.
And as we mentioned at the top, a loyal listener of WMOA as well.
Indeed. and I listen by way of the internet, as you would know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I pick up your live streaming off the internet and have just solid AM signal, good audio quality by way of my computer through listening to the internet, and I enjoy doing that. In fact, I listen to fairly regularly, Ben, some of the programming that you do, and enjoy that touch with Marietta, and enjoy being able to do it by way of live streaming, and I just enjoy the touch with Marietta that way. I really do.
That's certainly one of the things that we're very proud of, that we can send WMOA all around the world. We're speaking with Don Jordan, a WMOA alumnus from the late 50s, early 60s, lifelong radio fan. It has truly been a pleasure to speak with you today. Any final thoughts as we wrap up our time here?
Well, I would say just keep on doing what you're doing, Ben, in terms of being a local radio station. And by that, you would know what I mean, by doing the local programming, being in touch with the community, doing community service, public service, and just a lot of radio stations today, as you would know, maybe a lot of the listeners wouldn't appreciate the fact that there aren't that many stations today that do local live programming like you do. And I would commend you for that, and just keep on doing it. You're doing great.
We certainly appreciate that. And you're listening to WMOA Marietta. Don, we appreciate your time.
Okay, Ben, thanks much.